There are rules around the content of what you can have in your ad, regardless of which medium you are advertising in. The reason this matters is because there is a system in Australia of advertising self-regulation which allows for people in the community to make a complaint about your ad. And so what I'm going to talk about now is the complaint system, but then also take you through what the rules are and show you some examples of where businesses, medium and smaller businesses, have got it right and wrong. So very quickly, let me just tell you about the Advertising Standards Board and the Advertising Standards Bureau. So the Advertising Standards Board is 20 members of the Australian community, and their role is to consider complaints about the content of your advertisement in all mediums when somebody complains that the content is inappropriate. The Advertising Standards Board, as I said, is 20 members of the community, and we try and have a diverse group who represent a whole range of states and territories, different ethnic backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, ages, and of course gender. And that board is supported by our staff and office in Canberra. The key role of the two organisations is, as I said, to consider complaints about advertising in all mediums in Australia, but also to raise awareness of the complaint system and about advertising self-regulation. As I mentioned, complaints can be made about issues that are set out in a number of industry codes, and I'm going to talk about the main code, the AANA Code of Ethics. What happens once we get a complaint is that the board looks at the complaints, at the advertiser, and that's you, how you respond to the complaints, what the provisions of the relevant codes are, and the ad itself. And what's really important here is that the board can uphold complaints, which means that your ad will be banned and cannot be shown again. Most likely, though, is that the board will dismiss complaints, and which means that you can keep using your ad for as long as you like. But it's really important to understand the content rules so you know whether you're at risk of complaint, but more than that, about whether you're at risk of having an ad banned or not and all your hard-earned advertising dollars wasted. We do make an effort to raise awareness within the community of the complaint system so people know where to complain, and I'll just show you our latest advertisement.
If you find a commercial on TV or radio or an advertisement in a newspaper, magazine or online that you think is offensive, violent or sexist, we want to know. So contact us, the Advertising Standards Bureau. That's just what we're here for. We'll give your complaint a fair hearing by people just like you from all walks of life. And if it's an issue that contravenes the advertising codes, we will act. It's so easy to lodge a complaint online. Just go to adstandards.com.au and the ASB will give your complaint the fair hearing it deserves.
So you may see that advertisement around now, and now you'll understand what it's all about. So let's go to the code, and this is the key 6 provisions that you need to be aware of when you're designing the content of the advertisement. And this is called the Code of Ethics, developed by one of the peak industry associations, the Australian Association of National Advertisers. So these rules that I'm going to talk to you about aren't rules set in place by government. They're rules that industry has developed and imposed on itself, basically to protect advertisers from government intervention. Okay, so there's 6 key rules. One is that you cannot discriminate against or vilify people, that you cannot use sexual appeal in an exploitative and degrading manner. Violence can only be used if it's relevant to the product. You must always consider whether sex, sexuality and nudity is being treated with sensitivity to the relevant audience. Language must be appropriate, and strong or obscene language has to be avoided. And health and safety. You need to be careful that funny things actually aren't condoning unsafe or unhealthy behaviour. So let's look at the first of these, discrimination or vilification. Under this code, the ads shall not portray people or depict material in a way which discriminates against or vilifies a person or section of the community on account of a range of things. And you can see here race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, age, sexual preference, religion, disability, mental illness or political belief. So what we find is that many advertisers will use stereotypes, stereotypical images of women, for example, or of a particular ethnic group to create a funny point in an ad. You need to be really careful, though, that the effect of the stereotype is not to create a negative or a demeaning image of a person or group of people. So let's look at this next advertisement and pay close attention at the beginning to how the different people are portrayed and the voiceover.
Unlike some air conditioning companies, Actron Air doesn't try to be Australian. They are Australian, proudly delivering solutions for our unique climate for over 30 years. That's better. That's Actron.
So the complaint about this advertisement is the point of this ad was to highlight the fact that some multinational companies seek to present themselves as Australian when in reality they're not, and the advertiser is claiming that they are an Australian company. However, what they do is to show a few different men, and the complainant felt that the advertisement features heavily on making the Asian man appear to be un-Australian. Now, the board agreed with the complainant and felt that the way that the Asian man was the focus of the introduction of the opening scenes really showed him in an unfavourable un-Australian and as being un-Australian. The board considered that the depiction created an impression of the Asian man that was a negative depiction of people of Asian descent as being able to try to be Australian, not being real Australians. And so this sort of funny point in the ad really then became a breach of the rules and unfortunately wasn't able to be used again. In our next ad, you can see a similar type of sort of humorous attempt from the advertiser, which also generated a complaint, and this was around an issue of sexual preference. See what you think about whether this is showing, making a negative or discriminatory depiction of people of a particular sexual persuasion.
Nice watch, mate.
Oh, thanks, mate. I got it from Thomas.
Right now, Thomas has big Father's Day savings, like Michelle Herbal and watches over 50% off, Seiko watches down to $3.99, and Pulsar watches now just $1.49.
Gentlemen, hey, check out Rob's new watch. He got it from Thomas.
Don't miss the big sale on now at Thomas Jewellers.
So in this advertisement you can see the advertiser is presenting a story where it looks like where friends are playing golf and one of the guys thinks that he's just found out that his friend is gay. Now it makes a humorous tone. The complainant felt that it was being demeaning to people of particular sexual persuasion, but in the board's view it was making a joke about the guy wasn't. There was no negative implication about whether his friend was gay or not. It was just that it was a surprise to him that his friend may have been gay. So in the board's view, it was using a stereotype or a situation to create humour, but wasn't saying that being gay was negative or presenting it in a demeaning way. So this is an example of where you can use humour and a stereotypical depiction to create a funny, memorable ad, but without going so far that it becomes discriminatory. Second clause is relatively new in the rules around advertising content, and it's quite strict, which says that advertising or marketing shall not employ sexual appeal in a manner which is exploitative and degrading of any individual or group of people. So this is designed to prevent demeaning images of men or women. It tends to be women though that are used in advertising. And so think here about, there's nothing wrong with using an attractive woman or man in an ad, potentially clad in lingerie or a bikini, but don't show them in a way which is going to be demeaning to women or to men or exploitative of their situation. And let me show you this next advertisement, which was an example, unfortunately, of an ad where the board felt that the images of the women in conjunction, so the women were dressed in bikini with some short shorts, but their images were in bikini with some short shorts, but their images were accompanied by what the board felt was some sexual innuendo in the text. So here on the right you can see the comment, "Get it up faster every time," in conjunction with an image of a very attractive and woman not wearing many clothes. Now in the board's view, a likely interpretation that viewers would make is that this is a reference to a sexual act or sexual excitement, and the board considered that the image of the woman in conjunction with that text is a depiction that's exploitative, partly because the woman is not relevant to the product, but also because the focus is on her body, a sexualised pose, and the sexualised concept of an attractive woman. So the board considered the overall impression was exploitative and demeaning, associating her with sexual gratification or excitement. This is quite a common type of ad that used to be around, particularly in the hardware and heavy transport industry, and really this is the type of ad that if you put out now would definitely be banned and you won't be able to use it again. Doesn't mean, though, that you can't use images of attractive women in ads. And this is probably one that got a bit close to the line, but ended up being okay. And so just look at the beginning, but then see how the beginning shot fits into the overall content of the advertisement.
Got your attention?
Why do this?
Lone Star winch kits, just $9.90. Inflatable PFDs, still $55. Light spinning reels, $20. Selena jig rods, half price, $99. We're clearing a shipload of boating, fishing and water sports gear.
So come and see Terry and Moose at Regal Marine.
514 Canterbury Road, Vermont, or online at regalmarine.com.au.
So this advertisement for a marine store starts off with, as you saw, the image of a close-up image of a woman dressed in lingerie, not swimmers, I'd suggest, carrying a fishing rod. And so the complaint was that this was objectifying of women and exploitative and degrading. Now, obviously, the use of a woman in lingerie is not relevant to a fishing shop, even if you try to add a fishing rod into her hand. However, the board noted that in this ad, the advertiser is trying to be funny here and is using that old-fashioned concept of saying, have we got your attention, by using an image of a woman. And then you can see the rest of the ad is very much focused on what's on special at the marine store, and there's no other images of women. So the board considered that in the current ad, the depiction of the woman's backside is fleeting and is used in a humorous context and is sort of self-deprecating. So in this instance, the board considered that this ad was okay. It certainly was using an image which was objectifying, but in the overall context of the ad, it wasn't used in a way that was exploitative or degrading for women. Under Section 2.3 of the Code of Ethics, violence is regulated, and this is again quite strict, that ads shall not present or portray violence unless it's justifiable in the context of the product or service advertised. So if you have a think, what are the types of products or services that would justify the use of violence in the ad? And it's not relevant to say I've come up with a storyline that uses violence so it's, so that it's funny. If you think about what types of products or services justify the use of violence in an ad, we're really talking here about ads for violent movies or video games, and they tend to be the things that we get the most complaints about in terms of violence, or also public service messages around messages around domestic violence and safe driving, for example, will quite often use violent images to get a point across. But basically, try not to use gratuitous violence in an ad. One of the most common complaints that we get is about slapstick violence, and even this really is not acceptable. You really need to be thinking about what is coming across in the ad and being aware of what the community standards are.
What about this weather?
I reckon. Bit of rain coming, Andy.
Your tank yet? Nah, not yet. I see Barry's got a camel tank.
Yeah, I see Brian's got one. And Robbo.
Robbo? But he's...
Thanks, doll.
Here, check this out.
You've got a camel tank?
Got tank envy? Call Camel Tanks today.
So this advertisement goes over the top about a man's love for his water tank, and the advertiser's sort of issue was the complainant's issue, was that the woman is seen to be slapping a man over the head. Now the board noted the sound and the expression of pain and felt that in the context of the ad, it is quite possible that could have actually hurt the person. The board felt that the sound effects were realistic and were not humorous and weren't considered in the board's view a slapstick depiction of violence. The board considered that slapping a friend in response to nothing relevant is, again, it's not relevant to the product or service advertised, which is water tanks, and Section 2.3 would require that violence is relevant to the product. In addition, though, you also need to bear in mind the social issues around, and domestic violence is a massive issue in Australia, and so the board felt that any violence perpetrated by, even though it's a woman against a man, was not appropriate in the context of an ad for water tanks. So this advertisement unfortunately ended up being banned. However, you can make some humorous references to unfortunate behaviour, and this was quite a recent ad which I'm sure you'll remember once you see it.
Honey, I've accidentally laminated the cat.
How bad is it?
Bad.
Another vet bill. Where will we get the money?
You need Wallet Wizard. Fast and easy cash loans from $100 to $5,000. Just go to walletwizard.com.au.
We also need a new laminator.
So the complaint here is that the ad was condoning violence against animals. What you need to, but the overall context of the ad was that the man was seen to be a bit of a fool, and there's no violence presented or portrayed. There's no images of what may or may not have happened to the cat. The board felt that the ad was intended to be humorous and that most people in the community would recognise the ridiculous nature of what the husband has supposedly done. There's no vision of the incident, and a disclaimer on screen to assure viewers that there was no harm to the cat in the ad. So, you can make references to unfortunate situations, but as long as you're not showing blood or the consequences of violence, and certainly nothing that involves people injuring other people, your ad would probably be okay. Sex, sexuality and nudity is one of the most controversial areas of content in advertising. And research that the Advertising Standards Bureau does every year continually shows that the community is okay with there being sex, sexuality and nudity in advertising. Most people don't expect ads to be devoid of any sexualised images or innuendo. What they are concerned about, though, is whether the sex is treated with sensitivity to the relevant audience. So think about whether kids or young adults or older people, or as Layla mentioned, people of particular ethnic backgrounds might be listening or reading something, and whether what you've shown in terms of sex, sexuality and nudity is sensitive to that audience. Now let me show you a couple of examples here, and this is quite a recent one from South Australia, which is an advertisement on the side of a building rather than a billboard, but on the side of a building for a hydroponics shop. And you can see, if you've got a good resolution on your screen, you can see that it's an image of a man with a woman straddling him, and they both appear to be naked. And it's certainly a high degree of nudity. You can't see breasts or buttocks or any genitalia, but it's quite a sexualised pose. And so the board's view was that this was a sexualised image. And then they think about who's going to be seeing this. And on a billboard or a side of a shop, generally there's a fairly broad audience of people who would see this. And the board's view is that such a highly sexualised advertisement does not treat sex and nudity with sensitivity to a broad audience. And so even though the target audience, your customers, might think it's really funny, they're not the only ones who are seeing it. And the board has to judge it against who's going to be seeing it, not who your target market is. So this, fortunately or not, was also banned, this ad, and unable to be used again in that medium. This was quite a cute little ad that we had complaints about a few years ago from Western Australia. It's an ad for a cremation service, and the complaints were health and safety, sitting too close to an open fire, but in terms of our sort of context today, the concerns were about nudity. Now, what the board looks at in terms of nudity also is, can you see any rude bits? Here you can only see the couple's buttocks. And is the nudity used in conjunction with sexualised poses or a sexy theme? The board's view is that this is a nude couple. It's not sexualised, and they're out in the bush camping, so not necessarily unlikely sort of situation. So the board felt that this was a level of nudity that was sensitive to the relevant audience, and that most of the complaints really were related to the concept of cremation and the image of the older couple above the fire. So you can use nudity, but the greater the level of nudity, just think about whether it's sexualised. And again, who is your audience? Who's going to be seeing it? Language is something which is also regulated under the code, and under the code in advertising, you can only use language that's appropriate in the circumstances. And again, you need to think about who your relevant audience and medium are. And strong or obscene language should be avoided. And most complaints around language tend to relate to radio advertising or to large format billboards. And so we've got one radio ad to play you, which see if you think about whether it was banned or not.
What? Are you colourblind? Green means go. Geez, trucks take off faster than you. Don't let the Volvo win. Forward for Pete's sake. I didn't know I was in the car with Nan. Get out a second and we might actually be able to beat this turkey. If that tool would just get out of the way. Loser!
This weekend, shut the little backseat drivers up with one hell of a day out. Go karting at Kingston Park Raceway. Hit kingstonpark.com.au.
Okay, so in this ad there's two elements. One is that you hear a child using the words tool and loser, and in the board's view, the context of the kid using those words is an abusive delivery by a child to another person. And in the board's view, having a child use that language, even though you probably wouldn't call it necessarily strong or obscene language, but it's inappropriate for children to be seen using aggressive, bad language towards someone else. The other issue here is that the advertisement uses a beeped out word that complainants felt was actually using the word bastard. Now what the board has consistently said is okay is that you can suggest a word, but it does need to be beeped out. So the word that was inferred in this situation, if it was actually said, would probably have been inappropriate, but because it was beeped out and you're not actually hearing what the word is, the board felt that it was that element was okay. But the version that shows the children, where you can hear the child making the abusive bad language, that ad was banned. Now what the advertiser could do though was to modify the ad, and so they took out the bits where the child used the bad language. There was still the soundtrack of a child abusing other people but not using as bad a language, and that version was okay then. One of the other things about language, and it can be verbal, as I said, or it can be images. And the complaint here is this billboard was using an obscene gesture or making an allusion to an obscene gesture. The board considered that this was okay though. It's a stylised image. Some people may see it as an offensive gesture, but it's less likely to be seen by children and by more people in the community as being an offensive gesture. So the board considered that although the image in connection with the text is suggestive of an offensive gesture, it's relatively subtle and doesn't actually feature the bad language or someone making an obscene gesture. And so the board felt that this was okay to use. So think again about who's going to be seeing your ad and what different people in the audience will take from what you're showing. So the last key element of the code is around health and safety, and this clause requires that ads shall not depict material contrary to prevailing community standards on health and safety. So what are prevailing community standards? Well, it's not always things that are prohibited by law. Some things, like showing people riding a bicycle on a road without a helmet, will always be banned because they are behaviour which is considered by the community and by legislators as being unsafe behaviour. Other things, though, can be a bit harder to tell whether it's a community standard. So the board recently banned an ad just this week which condoned and encouraged tanning. Now, that is an emerging significant health issue in Australia, and the board considered that the ad was going against the prevailing community standards around safe skin. Let's look at a couple of examples though. So in this advertisement is part of a series where there is very significant exaggeration and fantasy, and generally that will get you across the line for health and safety, but see if you think there was a particular bit of this ad that just really is unsafe.
The sun, limitless power. But in my home, I've got its energy tamed like a Shih Tzu poodle. But Budget Direct won't insure my place. Apparently, it's high risk. They say that by not insuring risky people like me, they can save other people heaps.
At Budget Direct, we don't insure Captain Risky. To keep prices low, get 35% off home and contents insurance online. Quote now.
Bring it on, son! It's hot tub time.
So clearly we have, the now well-known Captain Risky, and the overall tone of these ads is humorous and fantastical, and is about behaviour that is shown as being undesirable behaviour. However, here the problem the board had with this ad is the use of electrical equipment in and around a hot tub, in and around water, and there's a very strong community standard around safety with electricity and water, but also a lot of legislation. And the board considered that as there's such significant effort made in the community to educate people about the danger of electrical equipment in and around water, that this ad was presenting material which was contrary to those presentations, which is contrary to those community standards, and so this advertisement ended up being banned. Now this ad, as you would know, is part of probably half a dozen in the series, so the advertiser, although not happy about not being able to use this particular ad, but because they had a whole series of ads, they were able to replace this one with one of the others in the series, but you won't always have the luxury of doing that. Mm-hmm. This next ad again, so have a look at this, thinking, is it showing things which are contrary to health and safety?
Don't let anything stand between you and a good season. Marshmallow, Double G, Wild Radish, the list goes on. It's time to take action. You need a fast-acting contact herbicide designed to improve control of broadleaf weeds. So, when you need a good start in your paddock, nail 'em quick. Nail from Crop Care.
So this one, the complaint, as you can probably imagine, is unsafe behaviour with nail gun, and it can of course be a very significant weapon. But the board did note that generally nail guns can only be used upon contact and pressure with another object, and then in this ad, the nail gun is a metaphor for the power that the product has to kill weeds. So the board considered that the use of the nail gun in this manner was intended to create a dramatic portrayal of the management of weeds, and that it is unrealistic and clearly intended to be seen as a dramatisation of the power of the weed killer. But what's important here also is that you don't actually see the person fire the nail gun, and certainly that there's no other people around in that ad, so that in which case that would add a whole different level of unsafe behaviour being depicted. So that's the 6 key bits of the code, and so if you're across those 6 rules, that will give you a pretty good idea of whether your advertising is going to be okay or not. So summarising them down to the 5 sort of key factors that you need to think about when you're coming up with a concept for what's to go into your ad. Think about the personal views and the morals of your likely audience, not of your target audience, the audience who's going to see your ad, because their personal views or morals will dictate whether they feel that the ad is offensive or not, and whether they potentially put in a complaint. Think about whether the ad is perceived to be relevant to the target audience and the product or service. So think again about, okay, you can use an attractive woman in a bikini, but is using her going to be relevant to the product? And if it's not, you need to be very careful about how you're using that person. What we've also found is that the extent to which community members can relate to the scenario depicted in the ad means they're more likely to relate to or sympathise with the situation and find it acceptable. So, so think about that. Humour, very important in something that could be offensive suddenly being okay because the humour that you've used worked. And timing, and this is mainly the situation with television in all its different forms now, and radio. Think about the time of day or night an ad is played, and this will have an influence on whether it's seen to be acceptable, particularly around language and sexual images. So let me just quickly finish off, just to make you understand how the system works, is that if you get the ad wrong, there are consequences. As I mentioned, a complaint from the community can be considered by the Advertising Standards Board, and if the board considers that the ad doesn't meet the standards set out in the Code of Ethics that we've just been through, then the board can end up banning your ad. What this means then is that your ad has to be removed as soon as possible, and that it cannot be used again unless you've modified it to take out whatever the problem bit is. Now, sometimes an ad cannot be modified because the problem is just an inherent part of the ad. But sometimes, as I said, for example, with the radio ad, being able to take out a bit, some words, means that it can be okay. But it's best not to take that chance. Obviously then, there will be, apart from the cost of not being able to use the advertisement again, there is also, in this particular case for outdoor advertising, the cost of having to be able to, of removing the ad before at the end of its cycle. One other thing to think about also is whether negative media sentiment over offensive ads is worthwhile and is part of your brand. There's a lot of research coming out, and particularly for some types of brands, is that the old concept of any publicity is good publicity really is not the case. And some recent studies in America have shown, for example, that the controversial advertising by company American Apparel was actually having the opposite effect to that intended, pushing away consumers. And like it or not, decisions of the Advertising Standards Board about ads which are banned get a lot of media coverage in Australia, so you really can't risk the reputation of your brand if you get it wrong. Just have a look at this slide. As I said, the rules that we've talked about are rules that are developed by industry for industry, so they aren't government imposed rules that you should try and think that these rules are in place to show that industry advertisers actually care about the community standards. Having these rules in place and enforced by the Advertising Standards Bureau helps prevent the need for government regulation, which is something that we all want to avoid because it will make your life doing your business and advertising much more expensive, difficult, and much slower. So what we need is your support by understanding and meeting the content rules. So do spend some time on our website having a look at the rules and recent cases if you're about to embark on a new campaign. And then if, in the unlikely situation that we do get a complaint about your ad, please cooperate with us on a response and also, most importantly, on complying with the decision to have the ad removed in the instance that an ad is banned. So as I said, go to our website, adstandards.com.au, to find out about board decisions. There's a wealth of information there about recent decisions, current issues, research, and subscribe to our bulletin or follow us on Twitter for up-to-date and up-to-date information, recent decisions. There's also a wealth of information put out by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and they have quite a few resources specifically for small business, and this is around the important area of truth and accuracy in advertising. So have a look at this slide when you've got a bit more time. Go to their website. They've got free online education programs for small business, information that you can print out, and also networks, a very valuable source of information on truth and accuracy.